Hello and welcome to the Matt Bird Show. I'm so pleased you have chosen to watch this programme. Together, we're going to explore how biblical principles, when effectively applied to our lives, can help us build life-transforming relationships in our family, in our business and in our community. We're going to look at the Bible as a book of relationships, not a book of religion. It is a living record of how God has reached out throughout human history to have a relationship with humanity. So when we read it, we learn about how to build a relationship with God and with one another. Interestingly, the majority of characters within the Bible were not professional religious leaders, but people like us, parents and children, brothers and sisters, business owners and employees, civic leaders and neighbours, as well as followers of Jesus Christ and members of his church. There is a story of a baby, Israelite boy, born at a time of great uncertainty. At that time, the king of Egypt was concerned that if his country went to war, the Israelites might side with their enemies against them. So the king enslaved the Israelites and commanded an act of genocide. The midwives were to kill all Israelite boys at birth. The mother of this particular boy managed to protect him, and by a strange turn of circumstances, the boy came under the protection of the king's daughter and was raised in the Egyptian court. When the child grew into a man, he saw an Egyptian slave master beating an Israelite slave. And in a mad moment, he killed the Egyptian and hid his body. The following day, when he saw two Israelites fighting, he confronted the one in the wrong. The Israelite turned on him and asked if he was going to kill him like he killed the Egyptian the day before. The king tried to have him killed for manslaughter. However, he fled to another region where he got married, began work as a shepherd, and had a child. Life went on until one day God unmistakably spoke to the young man and asked him to return to Egypt and command the king to release the Israelites from slavery. That is exactly what he did. The king, however, did not respond well, and so God sent plagues upon Egypt until the king finally relented and let the Israelite people go. A mass exodus followed in which the Israelites plundered the Egyptians of their wealth and began a whole new adventure. This is, of course, the story of Moses. And when I think about what I can learn about relationships from his life, I realise that it's all about self-determination. For me, the principle of self-determination shows that your relationship with the past can either entrap or empower you for the future. Moses was unique in that he was born an Israelite and raised an Egyptian, so he had a unique relationship between those two cultures. He committed manslaughter and ran away to avoid the consequences and began life again in another land. When God spoke to him about his relationships to become a mediator between the Israelites and Egyptians, he found himself in a difficult place. Moses could either remain entrapped by his past as a killer or be empowered by his unique heritage as an Israelite and Egyptian. His self-determination won the day, and he pursued God's purpose for his life. When I look back on my childhood, I had a good relationship with my parents, but we were not a particularly sociable family. Growing up as a teenager, I can only remember being allowed a friend home from school to play on one occasion. I remember his name, the weather, and everything about that day because it was a unique, once-in-a-lifetime occurrence. In contrast, I remember on many occasions when the doorbell would ring and where we'd be instructed to turn the TV onto mute and hide behind the sofa and pretend we weren't home. To me, this was normal. It was only much later in life when I learnt that it really wasn't. I am now the parent of 3 children, and I have chosen to do relationships differently. The children have lots of play dates. We frequently have people in our home who need somewhere to stay. At weekends, we welcome guests, and the sofas are firmly pushed against the walls. I've chosen not to be entrapped by my relationships from the past, but to empower my relationships for my future. But it is true that history often repeats itself. If history is positive, then that's fabulous. However, if the history is bad, then that's not good news at all. It is said that hurt people hurt people. Those that have been the victims of abuse can then become the abusers. Breaking rather than repeating the cycle of what experience has taught you is not an easy thing to do. There are young men I mentor who have had a difficult upbringing. It has taken a lot of guts and effort for them to make personal choices about relationships they make that keep them out of gang life or out of prison. If we do not learn another way, we may have no choice but to repeat that which we have been shown. Positive role modelling and mentoring and relationships are absolutely critical in this process. Self-awareness and self-determination are both required. Self-awareness helps you recognise that what you've experienced in relationships is not positive and that there is an alternative. Self-determination gives you the strength to say no to the bad and yes to the good. Business and social entrepreneurs are not one-time successes. In the early years, entrepreneurs often know more failure than success. Success is not something you stroll into by pure luck. Entrepreneurs live through the cycle of innovating, experimenting and learning dozens and sometimes hundreds of times before they find success. This requires more character, grit and self-determination than any business school can ever teach you. For every failure, they pick themselves up, dust themselves off and learn from what went wrong and come back even stronger. As the writer to the Hebrews says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Faith is like a race where we can be slowed down and tripped up along the way. But those with self-determination in Christ will succeed. My special guest today is a businesswoman who is renowned for helping individuals and teams achieve their goals. Julia Regis, you're very welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Julia, tell us what it is about Moses' life and his determination that inspires you the most.
There's just so very much about Moses that I could
There's
talk
a great
about.
story.
There's so much. I love the fact that he's a natural leader and that he didn't recognise his own value.
And what do you mean by natural leader?
Okay, so when I say a natural leader, he didn't feel that he was capable of being a leader. He didn't feel that he was qualified. When we read the scripture, we see that he said to God, "Who, me?" Almost as if he's saying to the Lord, well, are you sure that you've got the right man?
Else?
Is there somebody else that you're referring to? That's what I'm talking about when I say he didn't qualify himself as a leader.
So like most of us then?
Like most of us, we don't see what God sees for our life. We think about what we can do for God in the parameters of our abilities. Whereas God looks beyond what we perceive as our abilities. He looks at our heart, he looks at the character that we have, and he looks at the potential. We know that he has plans for our life even before we were born in our mother's womb, he says. And we just don't have a clue. We can't grasp what God has in store for us. And when I think of Moses and I read the story of Moses, I see someone that didn't grasp the greatness that laid within him.
Yeah.
You know, and I just really enjoy that.
It's encouraging, isn't it?
Really encouraging. You know, I love that Moses, he didn't waver from the promises of God. He was steadfast in believing what God said about the children of Israel. You know, multiple refusals by Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go, yet he still went back time and time again and was obedient to God's instructions.
Incredibly determined.
It must have been so difficult for him as well. shepherding, if you like, the children of Israel. They were somewhat difficult at times. The Bible tells us that they complained and they moaned and they groaned. And I just love how he was determined to be obedient to God's word and God's will for his life and for the children of Israel. And he didn't give up. He stayed focused on God's promises. And that really inspires me.
Yeah. And he made some mistakes, didn't he? I mean,
he certainly
killed the
did.
Egyptian slave master.
He certainly did. But that's something, again, that I find so encouraging, because it's not where you start, it's where you finish.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, and when you look at the story of Moses, you see the anger that he had, and the Egyptian slave master, when he killed his fellow Israelite, that stirred up some anger within him.
Yeah.
But we look at Moses later on and we see that he had begun to channel that anger into something constructive and positive that didn't just benefit his life and his family's life, but also the nation, the nation of Israel. And how encouraging is that for us, where we feel that we've made mistakes in life, such as I have in my life, and to see that God doesn't look at who we were and what we were. He looks at who we can be in his eyes, and he focuses on the plan that he has for our lives.
Yeah.
I find that just totally heartwarming.
Yeah. So you mentioned this difficult time in your life. What happened? Would you mind talking about?
Oh, I mean, again, there are so many to choose from, but if you were to ask me of one single experience, I would have to talk about becoming a single mum at 19. Now, you might think, well, there's lots of single mothers out there, and that is true, but I'm sure that most of them would agree that it can be a very lonely experience. I became pregnant at 18, a mum at 19. I grew up in a church family, a very strict church environment.
Gosh.
So clearly I was somewhat of a disappointment to my mother and those others around me, and people were not backward at coming forward to let me know that. And you know, Matt, how powerful words are.
Disapproval.
And yeah, the impact that can have on shaping who you are as a young person and as an adult. But the significant thing about becoming a parent at 19 was when I went into labour, I was on my own. And because of the disapproval and the disappointment that was around at the time, I ended up giving birth to my son on my own after having a 21-hour labour. And that was a real defining moment in my life.
So your mum, your friends?
There was no one there at the birth. For whatever reasons, I was on my own when I gave birth. But I remember giving birth and thinking, okay, son, it's just me and you now. We are on our own. And something changed in me in that moment. I can remember it as clear as day now. So whilst my heart was full of love for my son, there was a steeliness that developed within me that I'd never wanted to feel, that feeling of loneliness again. I was disappointed with myself, if the truth be known. I had grown up in a single parent family, and I had determined in my heart that I wasn't going to repeat that cycle. Yet, here I was, repeating that same cycle. So some of the things that people were saying hit home because of my own aspirations around wanting to raise any children within a family, with a mother and a father. So those disappointments were quite impacting for me.
And this show is all about self-determination. And either our past entraps us and keeps us from our future, or our past can empower us and change us for our future.
So very true.
I mean, where you started isn't where you've finished or where you've got so far. What happened? What happened in you that has led you to this point?
Like Moses, I think I determined in my heart that I was going to make something of my life. And again, I think the critics, the disapprovers, the people that had the negative things to say actually provided me with a little bit of fuel, if you like, to say, actually, I'm not going to be a statistic, and this is not going to be my lot. Now, becoming a mum was one of the best things that ever happened to me, but I think some of the expectations around me were that my life would pretty much be over and I would be resigned to not very much. But I determined in my heart that I was not going to let this be my lot, and I was going to be a good parent and raise my son the best way that I knew how. And I set about working very hard. And as you know, when a child comes along, the family falls in love with the child, and my family became very, very supportive to me. I would not have been able to do what I did without their support.
Yeah.
I went back to college, back to university, studied part-time in the evening to master's degree level whilst working full-time, trying to raise my son with the support of my family. Got involved in voluntary work. I was a school governor at age 23.
Wow.
And got involved in other various projects because I recognised the importance of giving back.
Yeah.
So I turned that around by making a decision ultimately that there was more to be had and more to be gained in life.
Yeah.
And I was going to go after that.
Yeah.
And was able to purchase my first home at age 26. Now, for a girl coming from an inner city background, that was considered somewhat of an achievement.
Yeah, incredible. And the church's attitude to you at the time was the disapproval and the tutting and all of that you described. How did their attitude change over that time? Did it change?
I would say yes. I mean, I couldn't wait to get away from that church environment, if I'm going to be totally frank. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people listening that can resonate with that, because there were some good things about that experience, but there were some things that really impacted me quite deeply.
Yeah.
And I couldn't wait to get away from that experience. And, you know, that also meant I moved away from God, sadly. And then made choices, life choices, particularly where relationships were concerned, that weren't great. So on the outside, I looked to the world like I had it all together. You know, good job, I had my own home, the car and the holidays and all of that. But inwardly, my self-esteem, my confidence was still at base level.
Yeah.
So I had to do a lot of work on myself. And even before I became a Christian and this time had a true experience of Jesus, I set about doing some work on me. Becoming a Christian again.
Yeah.
Well, I actually started on what you would call some kind of self-empowerment journey before I became a Christian. I was reading all of these books, and many of them were very useful in helping me to start to believe in myself and to build my self-esteem.
Yeah.
And one day I was talking to a business mentor, and a similar business to mine, consultancy. He was based in Florida, and we were having a conversation about empowerment, and he was bold enough to say, well, Julia, I know you know the truth. And he began to witness to me about the Lord and about the gospel. And as he spoke to me, I knew in my heart that what he was saying was true. And he challenged me to accept that truth and to make the decision to serve the Lord. And right there on the telephone, I made that decision to serve the Lord.
Yeah.
So,
amazing.
You know, and that was a business mentoring relationship.
Amazing.
Incredible man. We're still very good friends to this day.
Okay.
That was approximately 15 years ago.
And you re-engaged with the church? And
Absolutely. You know, I've come to learn that people sometimes do what they think is best at the time and in the era that we lived in. It doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that there was any real intention to do me harm, if that makes any sense. And
so Julia, to people listening, there might be some people listening who have, their child has done something, whatever it might be, and they wish they hadn't. You might be a church leader or part of a church leadership team, and there's a young person in the church that's done something that's just, you're kind of tutting at them. How would you encourage and challenge parents and churches around young people?
I think the biggest learning for me as a parent and as a young woman that went through some of the experiences that I did is to realise that I need to extend the same forgiveness that Christ has extended towards me. And whilst it's okay to express one's disappointment or disapproval, it must be done in the spirit of love, and it must be done in the context of the scriptures, which is God is merciful and he's gracious and he is forgiving.
Yes.
And then our actions have to line up and be congruent with those words and those scriptures that we are reading. Because we are not living out the scriptures in love, then what's it all about?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
And so my challenge to any parent or church leader, or my encouragement, I should say, would be, if you know that you have said something that has had a lasting negative impact on a young person, go and apologise. Go and say, I'm sorry. Can we have a talk? Can we have a chat? And help to bring healing,
Yeah.
help to bring wholeness. And, I talk to a lot of young people that I grew up with back in the day, and I think an apology would go a long way for some of those people.
Yeah. And if there's a young person listening who feels who's struggling with their parents or struggling with the church, how would you encourage them to be self-determined in God? What advice would you give them? It feels at the time like your world's kind of nearly falling apart, and I've been there.
Yeah.
But later on, you kind of see a different perspective. So, what encouragement would you give to young people who are feeling a bit disapproved of?
Most definitely talk to God about how you feel, and hopefully you've got some good confidence, some good friends around that you can speak to and share, your thoughts and feelings with, and that they'll pray with you. But if we go back to Moses, Moses was a murderer. He killed someone.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about disapproval, he did one of the very things that, we would consider absolutely horrendous.
Yeah.
But God still chose him.
Yeah.
He loved him, loves him, and had a plan and a purpose for his life.
Yeah.
So as a young person, know that if you've made a mistake, it's okay. God can take that mistake and turn it around for your good and for his glory.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's amazing. We've experienced that.
Absolutely.
It's the real thing.
It is the real thing. So gracious and merciful. Yeah.
So our relationships, our past can entrap us or
Yeah.
empower us. And Julia, you thank you for telling your story, because and I didn't know this when I invited you to be the guest on the show today, that you had this incredible experience and story to tell. And it's been wonderful how open you've been and honest you've been. And I hope for our viewers, it's encouraged them actually to look beyond their mistakes, as not to entrap them, but to empower them for the future. So thank you so much for being a guest
You're very welcome.
on the Matt Bird Show. I'm very grateful.
You're welcome.
As we wrap up the show today, I want to leave you with a couple of questions to help you apply the principle of self-determination. Firstly, where could your relationship with the past prevent you from stepping into the future? And secondly, how can you make better use of your relationship with the past to empower you for the future that God has for you? It would be great to hear some of your life-transforming stories, and specifically how you have experienced self-determination. Please take a moment right now to post a short testimonial on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, so that how God has worked in your life can encourage others too. As you go about your day, remember the story of Moses and the principle of self-determination, which explains that your relationship with the past can either entrap you or empower you for the future. Thank you so much for joining me on the Matt Bird Show today. I very much look forward to seeing you next week to explore how biblical principles can help you build life-transforming relationships in your family, in your business, and in your community. Goodbye for now.